So the idea of revolution, of overthrowing the oppressors, was taken to mean that everything that had held back progress must be destroyed, that all old ideas were corrupt and not to be trusted, and they must be smashed. So we see the workers smashing the past to create a new world, the idea of progress as something that would be eradicating everything that stood in its way. And we see that even with Delacroix. This woman here represents France. She's the allegorical figure of France herself, as well as the allegorical figure of liberty, and she's charging forward with the flag, unconcerned by the bodies being trampled. So these two artists, Wang Guangyi and Yu Minjun, are working at the end of the 20th century, and they're reckoning with the fact that the zealotry that came out with revolutionary ideals often corrupted the revolutionary ideals themselves. So Wang Guangyi is mocking this kind of propaganda poster. He's showing the cliche used in all of these of the upraised fist, which is something that appears again and again in the 20th century in all sorts of different political movements. The upraised arm, the upraised clenched fist. And this is a symbol of militism. But he is mocking the ironies of that militism. The workers here, with their exaggerated muscles, are holding Mao's little red book, which is you could say the map of how totalitarian repression would be done in China in the name of the revolution. At the same time, you can barely see it, but there are all sorts of little advertising slogans. And this ironic poster is mocking the promise of Coca-Cola, that capitalist commercial propaganda for the good life of sweet sodas, with communist propaganda to suggest China in the 1990s caught between two extremes that are both unsatisfying and potentially dehumanizing. And so that dehumanizing quality, Yu Minjun here in Freedom Leading the People, is doing something very subtle. He's actually recreating liberty leading the people. And he's recreating this sense of triumph, which is supposed to be an essential part of propaganda, political propaganda, whether it's on the right or the left. And he's got the upraised arm, but everyone's smiling, this spooky smile that we can expect from capitalist advertising, the smile where you're drinking the Coke and it's making you ecstatic to drink sugar water. And then you've also got the conformity mandated of Mao and his thought control, his cultural re-education. You have that represented in these gray shorts, white t-shirts, which resemble prison garb, but they also resemble, sort of the Gap and casual wear. There's a sense here, too, that there's a kind of profound malady, cultural malady, that is warping people's expressions and lives, that is this combination of the extremes of capitalism and communism. So in terms of an art of the 20th or 21st century that deals with the memory of Chinese tradition and the sense of the loss of that tradition, one of the most profound is Zhu Bing's A Book from the Sky. So this is an installation artwork, meaning he's using the entire environment of the Shenzhen Museum of Art. to put in that space a massive scroll. This is the longest scroll we've seen. Somehow it's both a hanging scroll and a hand scroll, but neither. And it is definitely referencing our great tradition of literati art, of the arts of the brush, of poetry, word, and image that is so central to Chinese identity. But what has he done? It's called A Book from the Sky. It is comprised of printed volumes and scrolls containing 4,000 false Chinese characters invented by the artist. So he's made a kind of fake Chinese alphabet. Looks like Chinese to a non-Chinese reader, but isn't. And he's then carved it into wooden blocks. So we know that China and Korea invented wood block printing, early printmaking. So he's referencing that invention of early printing that led to this great cultural tradition of literariness and of learning. But in this case, you can't read it and you can't learn from it. It's gibberish. He's invoking that great tradition as if to say, we can't read it anymore. We've lost it. We are in a place where we speak a language that we don't even know what it means anymore. And so Ai Weiwei also has this sense of the irony of loss and remembrance. He used the actual kilns that had been used for the great porcelains of the Ming court. And he had an army of 1,600 potters to make 100 million hand-painted porcelain sunflower seeds. Seeds invoking the possibility of growth, but also invoking the massive famines in China with Mao Zedong's state control of all industry, where millions were forced to live off of sunflower seeds. So these are all artworks that are using avant-garde forms. That means experimental, innovative kinds of art, innovative ways of using materials, because these are all poured into the Tate Gallery in this giant hallway. Innovative ways of thinking about the artwork as an object, because this isn't really a single object, right? But they're all using it to think about trauma and loss and what survives. So Japan also is a story of trauma and loss and what survives. So the Edo period, you know from your studies, was a period of purposeful isolation and control. In the 19th century, the ships of what the Japanese called the Southern barbarians, the Europeans, began to threaten that policy of isolation. And this was a period of economic stability due to wildly fluctuating prices of rice. So Americans and Russians approached Japan's ports wanting whaling trade relations. And the official policy was to rebuff them. They would actually kill anyone who washed ashore. This led to the famous gunboat diplomacy, the militaristic confrontation of the Americans with the Japanese to force trade. This stability, this period of instability leads to the shogunate falling. The emperor takes control again, and that's why the textbook has a specific section on the period in which we have imperial control again. But this is a short-lived period because Japan is growing increasingly fascist, like Italy, like Germany. Fascism is taking over, and its policies of colonialism, including the brutal colonization of Korea, where innumerable Korean women were forced into sexual slavery, and then the attack on China that leads to the horrible massacre at Nanking. So we have here again, the country has been drawn into the what we can call the age of total war, which is the age of World War I and World War II, where there is no separation between civilians and war. Previously in human history, war was something the soldiers conducted on battlefields, and it was not a mass war where entire cities and populations were massacred. This is what is changing with fascism, with Germany and Japan. Total war becomes the absolute policy of the German-Japanese alliance, which means to bomb anyone and everything into obliteration, and if you can't do that, put them in concentration camps. This leads to the most brutal war in human history in terms of the millions upon millions who are slaughtered, the entire destruction of whole cities, and it ends with a horrifying act of destruction that haunts the human imagination to this day, the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. So I've given you a few images to kind of set against this painful history: your attack on the Sanjo Palace, Hokusai and the wave crashing, and then this is by the great photographer Shomei Tomatsu. It is a photograph of a bottle melted and deformed by atomic bomb heat. He's trying to represent the unrepresentable. It is impossible to represent what it means for those cities and the people in them to have been annihilated. So he shows it through an object. This bottle and its warped, maimed form makes us think of bodies warped and maimed. And so he's engaging with the Japanese tradition of displacing the emotion onto things, which is something we saw in the paintings that we looked at in the Heian period, the Yamato-e painting. And Tomatsu is taking photography, a Western invention, and using it in this brilliant, creative way, and purposely, consciously adopting the kinds of compositional choices that we saw in our ukiyo-e woodblock prints. So, for instance, the kind of peering through the tree branches to forms below. We see the Japanese girl with the big bubble, and we see the American GI behind her. We see this kind of collision and conjunction of two worlds. His foreign culture with the English words club, right? This is the kind of red light district to entertain the American GIs, with, you know, the bar and the entertainment, and then her in her immense bubble. So he is also trying to represent the unrepresentable in a number of photographs that show us survivors of the atomic bombing and attempt to depict the 20th century events, which are so hard to depict. So Hiroshi Sugimoto is also looking to depict what cannot be depicted in a different way, not the trauma of World War II, but he's, in a sense, continuing the idea of the floating world, which has Buddhist connotations, right? Of the entertainment district as an example of the fleeting nature of pleasure. But he does it with the American 20th century entertainment districts, the drive-in movie theater. And he's using film. It's not the age of digital cameras yet. This is 1978. So when you make a photograph with film, you are taking a light-sensitive material, the film, and you are allowing light onto that film to capture the image for a distinct amount of time, usually a nanosecond. But he sets the aperture of his camera open for the duration of the film. So all the light that's emanating from the film in this theater, it's the floating world, it's a theater world, this is all coming onto his film. And what do you get when you film the light from the film for the entire duration? You get emptiness. You get pure light. You get what is the teaching of the Buddha. All composed things are like a dream, a phantom, a drop of dew, a flash of lightning.